area. They are asking any hikers to be aware of him, who's described as a 20-year-old Asian man who's 5'8" and slender with long black hair in a bun. And North Vancouver RCMP say they have a couple of people of interest as they continue the investigation into an incident last week. So an explosive device detonated outside the office of Infrastructure Minister Bowen Ma. At a press conference earlier today, she says that she's doing better and trusts the RCMP to do their investigation.
In the days since and the hours since, I think I've done a lot of reflecting on how frightening a situation like this can be for a community. And I want the community to know that my office continues to be there to support them and that I have full confidence in the RCMP as they conduct their investigation.
The mayor of the city of North Vancouver called the incident concerning, but said officials don't believe there's an ongoing risk to the public. At Vancouver International Airport says it's operating normally after Canadian airports were hit with a bomb threat today. NAV Canada, the organization that is responsible for air traffic control, says there were threats directed at airports in Ottawa, Montreal, Edmonton, Winnipeg, and Calgary, as well as here in Vancouver. It says there was a temporary ground stop, but operations are back to normal at YVR. YVR telling travelers also to check the status of their flights before heading to the airport. That's what we have for you so far. I'm Benit Brage. Stay with us. BC Today is coming up next.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Both Vancouver and now Victoria have pledged to crack down on crime and boost community safety. But how safe do you feel where you live? And what more should be done to keep our cities safe? And in our second half hour, the long-promised $10 a day childcare is still just a dream for many families. We'll speak with a childcare advocate about how the province needs to commit to affordable childcare. I'm Amy Bell in for Michelle Elliott, and this is BC Today. And thank you for joining us on radio, TV, and of course on live stream. You can call us now on our top story. Do you feel safe in your own community? And how do we address public safety concerns? Our number is 604-669-3733. You can also call 1-800-825-5950 or hit pound 690. You can also email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. So the City of Victoria is fast-tracking parts of its safety and wellness plan to address public disorder in the city's downtown core. It's allocating more than $10 million as a first step of its community safety and well-being plan endorsed by city councillors last month. Victoria Mayor Marianne Alto made the funding announcement on the heels of a number of violent incidents within a 12-hour period last Sunday.
There is no doubt in my mind that this is the single most important issue this council has dealt with. And the fact that it has looked at some very important issues, some very important programs, some very important projects, and made the collective decision to hold on some of them, to reduce some of them, to transfer funds by some of them, indicates the understanding of council that this is that issue. If we execute this, you will see the beginning of the tangible aspects of the community safety and well-being plan, which will unfold over the next few years, but over the next few months and perhaps into the next year, we can accomplish this with this commitment of finances, with this commitment of partners, and with this commitment of council. We must do this. We must do this. And I think the fact that I've been able to stand before you and tell you not just what we're going to do, but how we're going to pay for it, is an indication that it will happen.
That is Victoria Mayor Marianne Alto. And this year, Vancouver committed millions to tackling public safety. Task Force Barrage cost $5 million and is aimed to dismantle organized crime networks and target predatory criminals in the downtown east side. But public safety isn't just a big city problem. So we want to hear from you now. How safe do you feel in your community, and how should we address public safety concerns? Call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone if it's safe to do so, and you can email bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining me now are two experts, Eli Sopow, a retired RCMP civilian analyst and an associate professor at University Canada West with an expertise in change management and leadership, and he's here in Vancouver. Good afternoon, Eli.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us. Also with us is Gurpreet Singh Johal, a criminologist at Kwantlen Polytechnic University, and we've reached him today in Toronto. Good afternoon to you, Gurpreet.
Hello, good afternoon.
I will ask you both this question. Gurpreet, I'll start with you and then Eli. But Gurpreet, what do you think of Victoria's response?
Well, there's two parts to this. One is the fact that it's in line with other cities' concerns about what they refer to as disorder in a particular part of their city, usually somewhere in the downtown area. But the other part is this response specifically, and this allocation of funding for the police, is part of a larger project. And they've renounced this information about this particular part of their wellness plan. Mm-hmm. I'm really curious to see how holistic this wellness plan is as it relates to the kind of services that are needed by other community advocacy agencies.
And I do want to get back to that in just a moment, but I do want to ask the same question to you, Eli. What do you think of Victoria's response?
Well, I think it's a great idea, and kudos to the mayor for doing that. Over the last, actually, several years, Dr. Kurt Griffiths from SFU and actually Dr. Josh Murphy from Kwantlen, we've been looking at cities throughout British Columbia, and the same thing is cropping up all over the place. People are very concerned about community public safety, and by that we mean really usually the downtown core. And that area, what we're talking about really are homeless people, drug addiction, mental health issues, those kinds of things. This issue of a community safety and well-being plan is not new. It certainly has been advocated by a lot of people, including Dr. Griffiths, my colleague, over many, many years. Mm-hmm. And it's a good idea. It's a good idea in that it brings people together more than just, this is not a policing problem. So it brings together policing, social service agencies, mental health groups, and other agencies, both the provincial and sometimes federal government. That's great. The thing is, we hope they all make it to the table, because these things, when they've happened before and have been recommended, there's been a little reluctance sometimes from the provincial government to step forward. So it's got to be a cohesive approach to it, and we're hoping it's a good start.
Okay. We actually already have a phone call that's come in from Lynn in Victoria, and I'd like to hear what she has to say. Hi, Lynn. Thanks for calling BC today.
Hi there. This is a complicated issue, but I think it stems also from the fact that the mandated or voluntary mental health and addictions problem that the government, the BC government, has decided that they're not going to mandate help or healing. We don't have places for these people to go if they wanted to anyway. But I live just right in the city of Victoria, not Greater Victoria.
Okay.
And as a woman, I often, as other people do, we walk home from the theater after it finishes at 9 o'clock. I don't feel unsafe at all. I often walk on Pandora Street right past the sad, slumped figures of those having taken a substance. The city have said that they want to spend money gentrifying Pandora Street. Where are those people going to go? Are they going to the shelter, and the shelter is temporary? It's such a, and benches and trees and lighting isn't going to make a difference to these people. They need immediate help now for their mental health, their head injuries, their trauma. And police aren't the ones. In Holland, they have a dedicated mental health team that when a person is in crisis, they are the ones to attend the emergency, not police. So I don't feel fear at all. I feel pity.
Lynn, thank you so much for raising those points, because that is something I wanted to delve into. And Gurpreet, I'll start with you. When you were talking about sort of a holistic approach, one thing that I constantly think about and return to is that, whatever the perception of safety is, many of these people are struggling with addiction, are struggling with mental health issues. That is the root cause, I suppose. Why not allocate more money and time and dedication to getting them the support they need, and then would we not see perhaps that perceived crime or that perceived unsafety going down?
So is that a question?
Yes, sorry. When you're talking about the sort of holistic approach, is that where we sort of need to look at the causes behind all of this and the people that we need to help first?
Yeah, I think Lynn's point there is so poignant, because it touches upon this issue that shows the many times city governments, they have kind of taken the punitive approach primarily, and not necessarily the holistic approach. There should be, as our colleague just mentioned, the sense of collaboration between multiple agencies. What the question I have, like, for city governments, that on one level they want to put funding into the police and support boots on the ground, but in the same voice, like for example in Vancouver, they want to pause on social housing. But they still want to have this language of revitalization of these neighborhoods. And as Lynn pointed, it's part of that language seems to be not necessarily, like if you want to see how sincere people are, you see it in practice in terms of, the types of supports people are getting. But if people who live in these areas, especially the unhoused, are experiencing, the only type of city response is in the form of the police, and they're getting this threat of, forced institutionalization or forced displacement, their needs are not being addressed. And so in that way, it's like, I really want to hear the voices of other agencies who are able to provide, the needs to these individuals. Because I think generally speaking, generally speaking, people are relatively sympathetic to the needs of individuals who are in in crisis in certain regards. However, our approach to that shouldn't be punitive. It shouldn't be police primarily. You know what I mean? In that regard, when cities, especially these governments, and they're coming up with these plans or are making these public, declarations, how sincere are they with respect to providing support to the other agencies who might be more suited to deal with the needs of these communities?
And thank you for all those points. And Eli, I did see you nodding in agreement, not just with Gurpreet, but also with our caller there, in that, sort of highlighting that perhaps the policing is not the right chord to strike. It's providing.
It's not. She made exactly. Sorry to interrupt you, but she made a really good point. Of course, she did. And we saw this when we were doing survey and public safety work for cities in Prince George and Penticton and a few other places as well. There's an absolute understanding this is not a policing matter, and that's why if you look at what Victoria is up to, and I think that Prince George was on its way to do the same thing, and that is to hire additional bylaw enforcement officers. Now you might wonder what's that all about, to give out traffic tickets? Well, hopefully not. Hopefully the definition of a bylaw enforcement officer is really to work together with the homeless people out there to really identify more of their needs and to pass on those needs, whether it's housing or often it's mental health issues and drug issues, to responsible agencies who will play a role in this. And my colleague made an absolute point. There's a real tendency for provincial governments to wash their hands of this. And Von Palmer from the Vancouver Sun made a good point today. He said, you can have all the housing projects in the world, but if you don't help people who are going into them to be safe from other people, you're going to have a huge problem. We found that, and to keep it brief, but we found that in the cities we went into, that when we spoke to the homeless people and people who needed housing, they said, I'd rather live on the street. And we were, wow, why did you want to do that? So, well, if you put me into one of those shelters or homes, frankly, they're full of people who are going to create a very negative atmosphere for me and a very negative environment. So there's been a failure by the provincial government to have those kind of situations where they are protected. There's some accountability. There's some real safety in those places. Yes, you bet. Your caller's right. Very complex issue, but it does involve all these other things.
I just want to read an email that we received from Lisa, and she says, I don't feel safe in Victoria. 5 years ago, I used to walk from Alex Golden or the McPherson Theatre at 10:30 to 11 at night to my home in Cook Street Village. I won't go near there today, not even in the daytime. I've quit buying groceries at Save-On on Pandora. I dread when I have to go for something at London Drugs or Market on Yates. And the other day, I just missed the guy with the sword who attacked people. I have been attacked in Cook Street Village by a mentally ill person and was hit and bruised with a metal rod. It took 3 police to get the woman in the police car. Going to the CIBC Bank is another risk because there is a whole line of people spun out on drugs. These folks need to be taken off the street and a place to be taken care of, not just another part of the city. Thank you for that, Lisa. And just, I think, echoing the point that you both have brought up, is these underlying issues that these people are grappling with that need to be resolved so that we can help them and get them off the street in a safe way and get to the root of their problems. I'd like to get another call in. We've had quite a few lined up from Myson in Pemberton. Hi, Myson.
Hi, I was on Theatre Row Business Association in Vancouver about 25 years ago, and we found out after the city started the bicycle program, they planned to cancel it, and we got a film crew down and we pointed out that 3 police cars have the same cost as 2 policemen. So when the police start walking or are on bikes, the cities save a lot of money. They can afford to put a lot more policemen out.
Oh, okay.
But I agree with the previous callers and your speakers that a lot of this is not a police problem. Somebody that's freaking out when downtown East Side came to Robson and Granville with their big van, it was dark inside. They'd put them down in a chair and give them a coffee with 3 sugars and calmly talk to them. And after 5 to 15 minutes, they'd be fine. No hospital was needed, no ambulance, no police. So when somebody's being violent, often police are needed. But if they're just shouting and having a bad moment, they can be dealt with much better and much cheaper by social workers.
That's an excellent point. Thank you for that. We'll also take a call in from Shelley in Burnaby. Hi, Shelley. Thanks for joining us. Hi, Shelley. Are you there?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can. What are your thoughts on safety in communities today?
Well, thank you so much for this important topic. I've called in many times about the same thing. My son, my only child, died of fentanyl poisoning in 2022.
I'm so
And
sorry.
he would tell me, Mom, the doctors don't want me to get off the drugs. They're keeping me on. I keep going in and saying, look, I don't want to be on this anymore. Like, oh, no, you just got to stay on your methadone. You got to stay on this. You got to stay on that. He weaned himself off, I don't know how many times. Okay? So we've got problems in our leadership because our leadership, I don't think, understand, unless you come from the streets or you come from experience with mental health or addiction, you are not going to really be able to have laser focus on what needs to be done. And people like that really need to be in government. They really need to be in leadership. And I've sent letters to my MLA, my MPs, with very little movement, actually no movement, right? So for me, I've gone in and assisted shutting down multiple recovery houses, flop houses in Surrey, British Columbia, because people were selling their dope out of there. They were dying in the houses. It's absolutely disastrous. And it's criminal that these safe houses are not regulated, right? There should be inspections. There should be fire safety inspections. There's just so much. And
It's certainly another...
We're spending millions of dollars on trying to decide, do we want a new Surrey police or do we want to, keep the RCMP or whatever? Why aren't we spending millions and billions of dollars on assembling and mobilizing social workers and housing for people and get to the root cause of these problems?
No, absolutely, Shelley. Thank you so much for that insight. And again, so sorry for your loss. One last phone call we can sneak in from William in Port Hardy. Hi, William.
Yeah, hello. Actually, it's almost repeating what everybody agrees upon, that police are not the solution. In my younger days, I used to teach everybody from grade 1 to 12, and I said one thing: no cigarettes, no alcohol, and heaven forbid, no dope. And I still actually am puzzled why some young people are still taking dope. It would seem to me the teachers should get through to them. But nevertheless, no child is ever born to become a criminal.
No, that is
There was a lawyer, a Jewish Canadian lawyer. I forgot his name now. And he said, these people are not mental, they are only poor. We have the right prime minister now. He knows economics. We have to, every child, when they graduate from high school or from grade 8, they need to learn a trade. They need to have a proper existence, and then nobody becomes criminal and wants to attack another human being. So we have to just look after these people, social workers, not police, okay? That's all I want to hear from this 94-year-old guy here from Port Hardy.
We always want to hear from you, no matter where you are.
We need our CBC, okay?
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You
Bye-bye.
have a good day. And as he said, he feels like he's repeating what so many people have said, and that there clearly is this need for services that will take care of the underlying issues that people are experiencing, such as mental illness, addiction, and homelessness, and focus more on that as opposed to focusing just on the policing. I do want to thank you both for being with us today. We've had so many calls, and I do want to get time to read a few more emails, but a really great conversation and obviously something we need to explore further. So thank you very much for joining me today.
Great, thanks a lot.
That was Gurpreet Singh Johal, a criminologist at Kwantlen Polytechnic University, and we reached him in Toronto. And Eli Sopow is a retired RCMP civilian analyst and an associate professor at University Canada West with an expertise in change management and leadership. And we did reach him in Vancouver. This email came in from Sally. She says, thanks for your show. While there's an emphasis on violence or perception of committed by the mentally ill or substance addicted, I'd like to point out that significant amounts of violence against women occur by people who don't fall into those categories and often don't get reported. My concern when it comes to safety against those issues in public spaces relates to the very large construction zones that will be appearing in Vancouver all along the 500 block of the Broadway plan, where towers will be built. During construction, these will be dead zones at night with insufficient lighting and disrupted viewpoints and pathways. This is profoundly unsafe for women and not necessary. While we are in a housing crisis, it can be solved with smaller buildings and smaller construction more quickly. Thank you so much for everybody engaging in today's topic. 12:27 here on BC Today. And yesterday we talked about British Columbia's publicly funded in vitro fertilization program that's now accepting applications. And here's what some of you had to say. Catherine writes, IVF, no. Fund $10 per day daycare and housing first. You're going to like what we're talking about next, Catherine. We don't need more children. We need to support the children that are already here. I would prefer if we put our tax dollars towards supporting families with housing and childcare. This is a waste of money, and IVF is a vanity project. Ron writes, my only thought here is this. Does this new coverage increase or decrease fairness in our systems? There are a lot of reasons why people can't afford to have children not related to fertility. For example, a couple might be suffering under the yoke of extreme poverty, and so they cannot see their dream of starting a family. Will that family be eligible for $20,000 of funding? The answer, of course, is no. It appears problematic to me. And Allison says, there are family reunification immigrant applications stalled, families who would bring children and likely expand their families. There are local parents who need economic and other types of support for the children already here, and lack of funding to address the shortage of medical care providers, affordable childcare, affordable housing, including social housing and co-ops, overcrowded schools, lack of community amenities, and an environment that is more unpredictable regarding natural disasters. Maybe there are factors to address for the children here and factors other than infertility that are behind our low birth rate. Our society says it values children and families, but too often our priorities say otherwise. As always, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. Well, we may not have any musical nooners for you today, but we do have Robert Zimmerman here with a look at the CBC local news.
Good afternoon. Vancouver International Airport is among several airports that faced disruptions today after bomb threats. NAV Canada says the threats affected airports in Vancouver, Ottawa, Montreal, Edmonton, Winnipeg, and Calgary. Richmond RCMP say their dog services team was brought in, but no threats were located, and there was no credible threat to public safety. The BC Wildfire Service says the fire north of Lytton was caused by an RCMP vehicle. An officer was towing a trailer on Highway 12 between Lytton and Lillooet when a wheel came off the trailer. That created a shower of sparks, which ignited the dry grass along the road. The officer tried using a fire extinguisher, but the fire spread too quickly. And Greater Vancouver realtors say home sales in the region may be showing possible signs of improving. The group says home sales in Greater Vancouver fell nearly 10% last month compared to the same period last year. But that number is about 25% below the region's 10-year seasonal average. And the Real Estate Board's Andrew Lees says the drop in June was about half the decline from May. And now the forecast on the north coast, a mix of sun and cloud this afternoon with a high of 15. Highs around 14 with showers and strong winds in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 18 degrees. Highs in the mid-20s with lots of sunshine this afternoon in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 27. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, lots of sunshine this afternoon with highs around 21. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you very much, Robert. This is, of course, BC Today on CBC. We're on Radio 1, CBC Television, and streaming on our website, cbc.ca/BC, YouTube at CBC Vancouver, and on the CBC News app. And more than 500 Uber drivers have unionized in Victoria, and that is a first in Canada, according to the union. Pablo Godoy is United Food and Commercial Workers Canada's Director for Emerging Sectors. He says the Uber drivers will be the first in Canada to have a formal say in their workplace, and they will soon bring a number of concerns to the negotiating table.
What it means is that drivers in Victoria will be the first group of workers in the gig and platform economy that will actually have a formal say in their workplace. They will have a formal seat at the table and will be able to bring forward their concerns, their proposals for what they'd like to see in terms of changes to the workplace conditions, and the union will be able to legally negotiate those changes. They'll commence a process that's known as the collective bargaining agreement process, and that will actually have drivers literally physically at the table being able to negotiate their contract and their workplace conditions with their company, in this case, Uber.
Godoy says drivers are campaigning for better workplace protections like health and safety measures, transparency around the app's rating system. Uber Canada says it will discuss these issues with the union, and the union hopes to negotiate its first collective agreement in the coming months. And back in 2018, BC families were promised a universal $10 a day daycare by 2028, but BC is falling short of that commitment. Waitlists continue to build, and finding a spot becomes a sport or a lottery, as less than 3% of BC children have access to this system. As a result, some children are kept in less than ideal situations. Parents are forced to make difficult and sometimes costly decisions. Advocates keep pushing for more funding from the province, but the situation doesn't seem to be getting brighter. So we want to hear to you. How does having access to affordable childcare impact your family? What more should the province do for affordable childcare? Call us now at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca. You can also comment on our TikTok account at CBCBC. Joining us today is Sharon Gregson, spokesperson for the Coalition of Childcare Advocates of BC. To find out why BC is falling behind on the childcare commitment. Good afternoon, Sharon. Thanks so much for coming in.
It's entirely my pleasure.
It's lovely to see you. So in 2018, the provincial government committed to a universal $10 a day childcare system that should be fully in place by 2028, but it seems BC is really falling behind. What are, I guess, BC's current barriers to reaching these funds or accessing these funds?
The current barrier is that while the federal government is stepping up and contributing to BC's childcare system, the provincial government has flatlined its budget. And so while we've seen some progress, no doubt about that, we've seen measurable progress since 2018, we're not going to build a system that all families who want and need childcare can access. We're not seeing educators fairly compensated, and we're not seeing any real dent in the waiting lists. So many people waiting for childcare.
And it's a common refrain you hear everywhere that childcare has such an impact. People having to line up, once they have a newborn to get on a wait list for preschool care. It is a huge weight, mentally and financially for so many families. Where are you sort of finding? Where's the government, I suppose, finding the biggest financial strain and maybe pushback to this $10 a day program?
Well, there shouldn't really be any pushback on investing in a bigger childcare system, the system that was actually promised and committed to, because the economic data now is not just hypothetical or theoretical about what the gains would be. Mm-hmm. We now know from the economists that the GDP in British Columbia benefited over $5 billion last year from growth in the childcare sector, and $1 billion of that was directly back to government. And so being able to attract 33,000 more people into the workforce, the direct and indirect repercussions from growing the childcare system are good for BC's economy. So it truly is not just hyperbole; it truly is an investment
in our future, in our present. I'm curious how other provinces and territories have handled this situation. If there's lessons that we can learn in other places across Canada.
That is such a good question, because we've now got 9 other provinces and territories that have been able to set their childcare fees across their entire sector. And so if you live in Manitoba or Saskatchewan, all your childcare is 10 a day, whereas in British Columbia, only 3% of childcare is actually a 10 a day site. Even in Ontario and Alberta, they've made better progress than we have. Other provinces have implemented wage grids for their early childhood educators. So BC was a leader, and sadly now we've fallen behind.
And what is that like for these families that were promised this childcare, perhaps that factored into their decisions to start a family or to expand their family, and that are now in this limbo of still being on wait lists and still paying an enormous amount of money to afford that child care, or as you said, returning back to the workplace?
So this is not what people voted for.
Yeah.
People did not vote for childcare fees to still in Vancouver be $1,600 a month. They didn't vote to be number 5,000 on a waiting list. They didn't vote to not even be able to put themselves on a waiting list because the waiting list had closed. It's so long. Educators didn't vote for a wage of $29 an hour for their important work. And so this is why we've relaunched the 10 a day campaign, because there's so much more work left to do to achieve the government's own commitment and what people have voted for.
And I would love to have people join our conversation, Sharon. They can call in at 604-669-3733. You can also reach us at 1-800-825-5950. We want to know your experience with affordable childcare, how access to it has impacted your family, and what we need to do to make sure people have access to it across our province. Sharon, why is it so important to have this type of subsidized childcare, especially now, given the state of finance, state of the world, even in so many aspects? Why is it so desperately needed, more so right now?
Well, it's good for children when high quality childcare is the right thing to do for children when their families want and need to access childcare. It's a gender equity issue, and fundamentally what the government cares about is an economic issue, to be able to get more parents participating in the workforce while their children are well cared for, well nurtured, is actually not just good for the future, it is good for now. And we know that $10 a day childcare is life-changing. It's not an exaggeration. People feel like they've won the lottery when they get 10 a day childcare. And we only have enough childcare in this province for 25% of children ages 0 to 12. So we have way more parents than that who want and need to work. And so we have a long way to go to actually support families adequately.
And I know we've talked about returning to the workforce and how that can stimulate the economy. But if we look at it in a more, I suppose, personal sense, what impact can a family experience from not being able to have affordable childcare? What does that ripple effect have on a family itself?
Right. So it often falls to the mother. It often means that she is not working or only able to work part-time. I was just talking to a young mom in Vernon who wants and needs to go back to work when her parental leave ends in 2 months. She's been on a waiting list since she got pregnant, and she has no idea what she's going to do for childcare. I talk to families all over this province all the time who are on waiting lists. Sometimes their children have finished elementary school and they've never been able to get the licensed care they need.
I know from personal experience people that their children aged out of the school system before they had access to any proper care. And it is interesting. Do you ever wonder if, because it typically does fall on women to provide the child care, to maybe stay home, if this was an issue that was negatively impacting the majority of men, is this perhaps something that would get a bit more attention?
Yeah, if we look back at the history of childcare, then it has very much always been a women's issue. And yet the solutions are so evident and so achievable. And we've boiled them down to 4 solutions for Premier Eby, and we know that they're doable.
Mm-hmm. Let us talk about the actual system of applying for this. So let's talk about the wait list. That obviously brings a lot of families frustrations, but maybe if you could sort of take us through the process of applying for $10 a day daycare spots.
So we only have enough licensed childcare in this province for 25% of children.
Okay.
And of the spaces that we do have, and that's 160,000 licensed childcare spaces, only 16,000 of them, so 10% of them, are actually a 10-a-day site. And so you can go onto the government's website and you can see which programs in your community are operating as 10 a day, and then you see how you get on their waiting list. And in many cases, you'll be told that you cannot even get onto the waiting list because the waiting list is already years long.
Right.
And so it becomes a matter of luck, winning the lottery, to find that you're on a 10-a-day waiting list and you've been accepted into a space.
I imagine it is an incredible feeling when you do manage to get one of those spots, but
people break down into tears. They're so happy.
I would think so. We do have a call that's come in now from Dave in Vancouver. Hi, Dave. How are you?
Not too bad. How are you doing?
Not too bad. What are your thoughts on making sure all families have access to affordable childcare?
Well, my situation, I'm a relatively late dad, and prior to that, I never understood the role of daycare. In fact, I would argue I kind of had a skeptical view of it, sort of saying, well, why aren't you looking after your own kids, right? And then having been in the system, my oldest is 10 right now, my youngest is 2.
Okay.
I sort of realized that the structure that they get from daycare is critical because there's no parenting lessons, I think, that are relevant anymore. And I think that daycare workers know that they have to almost be the parent and raise people's kids that are all spoiled, right? And mine included. And so they get the structure and discipline, and that's why I'm saying that through society, this is an investment in the long-term future of, again, creating nice human beings. And so that's why the $10 daycare, it's like mandatory health care, right? To me, it's at that level for me where I don't want people raising their kids without daycare intervention because I don't believe that they'll get the sense of values that we want as a society.
That's an interesting point.
For me, that's a 180. That's a 180 for me, I can say.
Well, I think, Dave, everybody's a much better parent before they actually have children, so you're not the only one to change your mind having them. But and I thank you for calling in and sharing that. But Sharon, I think that is something quite often is until you've had children, until you recognize how important that whole it takes a village sort of mentality is, you might not think of this as being something that you need to fight for. You might not think this is something that goes beyond taking care or babysitting a child. It can have a huge impact on their social development. It can have a huge impact on their relationships with other humans and with their parents.
Exactly. So we always talk about quality childcare as being an extension of parenting, not a replacement for parenting. And this is why early childhood educators who have got post-secondary qualifications, this is why they deserve to have fair remuneration. So good wages and benefits, good working conditions, because it is, as your caller said, vitally important work to be working with young children. It really is early childhood education.
Yeah, it is incredible work that they do. And also that leads me to a question I did want to ask, which is heartbreaking, in that there are parents that are faced to perhaps place their children under the supervision of people that perhaps are not fully able to care for that child in the best manner, or perhaps the safest manner. They have to keep their child in a situation that they aren't 100% comfortable with, just because that is the only option they can afford right now.
Unfortunately, the lack of licensed childcare means that parents are forced into situations that aren't of their choosing. And so it's not even a choice. When you need to go to work to pay the rent and buy groceries, and you're forced into childcare, which your fingers are crossed, hoping that it's safe and your child will be okay. And so in other places in the world, children have a legislated right to access early childhood education, the same way that our children here go to K to 12. And it's really, we need to think about what are the rights of young children, as well as it being a gender equity and an economic issue.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have another call in from Michaela in Abbotsford. Hi, Michaela.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for calling BC Today.
I just had a little bit of a, situation with childcare where I lived all the way up in Kamloops, and it took me, I was pregnant when I applied, and it took up until 2 weeks ago, my daughter is 3 now, in order to get an email back from one place. So I moved all the way to Abbotsford, and within 7 months, I got a daycare compared to 3 years.
Wow. And what impact has that had on your life, on your family's life?
Well, I'm a single mom, and I couldn't get a job for 7 months. I was living off of the childcare, like the CCB childcare thing. And that was, obviously not enough to live. I maxed out all my credit cards. And then by the time that my daughter got into daycare, I got a job.
Well, I'm glad that you have both a job and daycare, but that sounds like an incredibly difficult and just incredibly stressful time, especially as you're adjusting to new motherhood and having this constantly hanging over your shoulder. Michaela, thank you so much for raising those points. And that just echoes, Sharon, what you're saying, that this is such a gendered problem, that you have this single mom that cannot access a job because she cannot access childcare.
It's even worse for those who don't work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So if you need non-standard hours of care, an earlier morning so that you can get to a construction site, or you're in the restaurant trade and you need to work in the evenings and weekends, or you're in the gig economy and you don't know exactly what your schedule is going to be. We need a childcare system that's got the kind of flexibility to accommodate what is now the norm. Most people don't work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 anymore.
Well, and it does. It seems like it is so far behind in so many ways, but certainly that attitude that parenting and child rearing only happens between the hours of 9 to 5. We did get an email in from Emma. She says, I have an 8-month-old and a 3.5-year-old. We were lucky enough to get daycare for our older daughter, but I just heard from our childcare provider that our 8-month-old son will only be able to get a single day of care. That means that I may not be able to return to work until we get care for our son. While $10 a day daycare is a laudable goal, we need guaranteed access to childcare for all. The lack of space is a huge challenge for our family and many others. Creating more daycare space on an immediate basis should be a priority over $10 a day care. Emma, thank you for that. And again, sorry for what you are experiencing, but that I can't even imagine. You have care for one child and not being able to have that care for your second. It's difficult.
So there are solutions for Emma, and I'll just remind the listeners that in the election last fall, Premier Eby committed $500 million to capital expansion to create new childcare spaces, and that was not in the budget in February. So we need all existing programs to be invited to be 10 a day. We need that capital expansion to create new programs, and we've got to have a wage grid for educators, or else we won't have anybody to work in the new programs. So that fair wage grid is so important, and we need to make better use of elementary schools for school-age childcare, before and after school. Here we are starting summer, and parents are still going week by week trying to find sports camps.
Yeah.
It's a crazy making exercise.
Yeah, and we were talking about that on the morning show earlier. It just that desperate panic to get your child into at times incredibly expensive day camp or sleepaway camp, because that is your only option if you do not have full-time daycare.
While elementary schools are sitting empty in the summer.
Yeah. Lisa Bear said that government is working on continuing to improve access while bringing down costs. Have you heard anything about anything more about the proposed funding plan and any steps that they are taking to improve access? I know this was something that EB had campaigned on but was not included in the budget. Any sense?
Yeah, it's really disappointing at this stage. We just relaunched the 10 a Day campaign with massive support from the business community, from Labour, from families, from the economists, and yet we only see the government committing to the existing relatively low target that was in their federal agreement. Even though there's new federal money, the demand is huge. The need for economic activity up north, and we need families there and people to have childcare access. Sadly, we're focused on the budget for 2026, hoping that that's where we'll see the increases that are necessary.
All right, Sharon, we do have another call. This one from Erin in Maple Ridge. Hi, Erin.
Hello.
And so, what are your thoughts on the $10 a day daycare?
So I am a daycare owner, and I applied for the $10 a day. I went all the way through the process until the agreement signing, and at that point I declined. Basically, they give you envelopes full of money, we'll call them. So about this much money for supplies, this much money for wages, this much money for food, etc.
Okay.
At the end of the month, any of that money not spent goes back to the government. I can only keep 3%.
Okay.
I also have to give myself a wage, which is much lower than what I'm making now. The wages of the employees are going to be on a wage grid, and that wage grid is way lower than a lot of employees are already making.
Okay.
So we're going to be losing a lot of ECEs. The other reason there's less $10 is because of all of this. So private daycares basically aren't allowed to make money. The government is trying to basically turn this into a universal daycare, but without thinking about the employees in any way, shape, or form.
Oh, okay. And thank you. Really important to get that perspective on. And Sharon, I do see you.
Yeah.
You're nodding. You've probably heard these before, and thank you for that, Erin. What is the solution, and where have they gone wrong? Somebody that wants to be involved in this, wants to provide the $10 a day, but is not able to pay her employees fair wages or herself a fair wage.
It is completely perplexing why the government would be trying to undermine the success of 10-a-day childcare programs by offering low funding, which isn't adequate to pay staff decent wages and run quality programs. It is completely perplexing why they seem determined to undermine the success of 10-a-day. The caller is quite right. The funding envelopes that are being offered are not adequate, and we are talking to operators across the province and organizing advocacy for people to actually let the Premier know that 10-a-day was such a success. There needs to be more of it. That's what people want. But we need to pay educators decent wages, and we need to make sure that the operators have enough funding to run quality programs. The same way we expect elementary schools to be high quality, to be teachers with that are fairly compensated. We need to think the same way about early childhood education.
Are there any, or is there any sort of alternative support for families that are currently on these wait lists, that are currently struggling with finding adequate childcare?
No, really there isn't, other than using unregulated childcare, where you can find a caregiver who can care for up to 2 children. That means they don't have to be licensed, but then there's no health and safety monitoring at all, and so parents aren't necessarily comfortable doing that. There aren't a lot of options, no.
Have you had any sort of hint that the province will perhaps step things up, that they will perhaps come around in the next budget and provide an overwhelming amount of support, or at least adequate support for parents, or is this something that is in danger of just constantly being a low priority that never really gets addressed?
Well, let's hope not. I recently made a presentation to the Standing Committee on Finance for the upcoming budget 2026. And while the NDP MLAs on that committee didn't ask any questions of the presentation, I can only hope that they're hearing so much from constituents across the province, letting them know that the progress has stalled and that it's impacting families and employers, and the government needs to do better. Premier Eby needs to live up to his government's commitments.
Sharon, what would you say to somebody, a parent that is in this situation of being on a wait list, not having access to childcare that is suitable for them?
I do talk to those people on a regular basis who contact me.
I can imagine.
And
you
I
do.
tell them, visit your MLA, no matter which political stripe your MLA is. Let them know you want them to be your voice in the legislature. Let them know that you will be writing to Premier Eby, that you're going to contact the Coalition of Childcare Advocates. Get your voice heard, and there is a political solution to this issue.
And just quickly before I let you go, are there other places in the world that we really should be looking at too for examples?
Oh, absolutely. Most of Canada is now further ahead than British Columbia, certainly Quebec. Denmark is a good country to look to. Germany, many other places are doing childcare better than we are.
Okay, well, we certainly need to expand our horizons then, because it's at a crisis point. Sharon, thank you so much for coming in. Wonderful to speak with you. Yeah. That is Sharon Gregson, spokesperson for the Coalition of Coalition of Childcare Advocates of BC. And that is our show. Thank you for calling in and joining the discussion.